Okay, picture this. England, the year 878 AD. It's a land really on the rock. Fractured, teetering.
It's absolutely on the edge.
Yeah, on the edge of just collapsing. You've got this shadow hanging over everything. The Great Heathen Army, these Viking warriors, they'd swept across the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, just leaving, destruction everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's King Alfred the Great, cornered, hiding out, seemingly totally defeated. It must have felt like, game over for the Anglo-Saxons.
It was an incredibly desperate time, a real low point for Anglo-Saxon England, no doubt about it. But, and this is the fascinating part, right from that absolute depth of despair, something else starts to emerge. A flicker of hope, you could say, forged right there in his darkest hour.
That flicker, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This deep dive, it's all about the Battle of Edington, this desperate, bloody fight that basically decided the fate of Anglo-Saxon England. And in doing that, really cemented Alfred's legend.
It's a pivotal moment.
Totally. So we're going to unpack the maybe surprising facts and the key insights from the source material you've shared. We want to show you exactly how this seemingly lost cause just transforms into this huge victory that completely changes history.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
So to really get the miracle of Edington, we kind of need to rewind a bit, don't we? How did this great heathen army get so powerful in the first place? How did they bring England to its knees like that? I mean, the Viking presence wasn't totally new, was it?
No, far from it. The first Viking raids, they'd been more sporadic, going back even to the late 8th century. You had the raid at Portland, sometime between 786 and 802.
Okay.
But the one that really, really stuck in the Anglo-Saxon mind, the one the chronicles describe with dire forewarnings, excessive whirlwinds and lightnings, and even, get this, fiery dragons seen flying in the air.
Fiery dragons, wow.
Yeah, that was the infamous raid on Lindisfarne in 793.
That imagery. Fiery dragons in the air. It's just so powerful. It paints this picture of absolute terror.
But what if that detail, maybe even more than the battle accounts, tell us about the psychological side of it, the Viking impact, or maybe how the Anglo-Saxons were just trying to process this enemy they barely understood. It's not just description, is it? It feels like a peek into their whole world.
It absolutely is. Those really vivid, almost, mythical descriptions. They speak volumes about the huge psychological shock these first raids delivered. The Vikings weren't just invaders. They were seen as this incomprehensible force, maybe even supernatural, disrupting the whole Anglo-Saxon view of the world.
Right.
And that just amplified the terror, made them seem almost unstoppable.
But those early attacks, they were mostly about grabbing loot, right?
Yeah.
Plunder. Then around the mid-860s, something really changed.
That's exactly right. Around 865, 866, what the Saxons start calling the Great Heathen Army arrives. And their goal isn't just raiding anymore. The sources say it was conquest and residence. They were there to stay. Ah, okay. So conquest and residence, not just hit and run for treasure. They're here to actually tear down what's there and build something new their way. That must have forced the Anglo-Saxons into a whole different mindset.
Precisely. It forced a completely different kind of fight. It wasn't just defending against quick raids now. It was fighting for their very existence. Their political survival, their whole way of life.
And this army was big.
Well, estimates put it between maybe 500 and 1,000 men, which for the time was a really formidable force. And they were systematic. In less than 10 years, between 865 and 874, they took Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, often kicking out the old kings and putting in their own puppet rulers or chieftains.
And their tactics, you mentioned they were brutally effective. What made them so good? Was it just raw force, or was there more strategy involved compared to, say, the Anglo-Saxons?
It was definitely a mix. They moved incredibly fast, hitting targets before defenses could really be organized. And crucially, they set up these fortified winter camps.
Winter camps.
Yeah, that let them stay on English soil all year round, consolidating their gains, planning the next move. It was this relentless pressure.
Yeah.
Submit or be destroyed, basically.
Which left Wessex, Alfred's kingdom, the last one standing.
The last bastion. Exactly. Completely alone against this tide.
Truly cornered.
Yes. And the Danish strategy by then was often, occupy a fortified town, then demand money to leave Danegeld. Essentially a protection racket on a huge scale.
And Alfred paid?
He did. At this point, he paid them off repeatedly. At Wareham in 875, Exeter in 877, he was basically buying time, or maybe just desperately hoping to stop more devastation.
But even that didn't work, because then came what sounds like Alfred's absolute lowest point, the moment he seemed truly beaten.
It was devastating. Midwinter, just after 12th night, so probably the night of January 6th or 7th, 878, the Danes launched this sudden surprise attack on Chippenham, where Alfred was staying.
A surprise attack in winter?
Exactly. It completely caught them off guard. Forced Alfred to flee with a small force, retreating into the marshes, the natural defenses of Athelney and Somerset. Now, the contemporary chronicles, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, they try to spin it like Alfred was still in control.
Right, gonna keep up appearances.
Yeah, but historians looking back think he was actually, quote, ineffectually chased. He just didn't have the strength at that point. Couldn't hold fortified towns, couldn't win an open battle against them.
Okay, so Alfred is cornered, looks defeated, just a small band of followers left, hiding in the swamps. From that situation, what's the next move? How does he even begin to turn things around?
It's really quite remarkable. He transforms that isolation, that hiding place, into what you called his crucible. Instead of giving in to despair, this darkest hour becomes this time of intense, meticulous planning. Around Easter 878, he starts building a fortress right there at Athelney.
In the marshes.
In the marshes. It was a strategic move, gave him a secure base to regroup, gather intelligence, and start plotting his comeback.
A crucible, indeed. So it wasn't just hiding, it was strategic incubation, planning. And then came the big gamble, the call to arms. That sounds incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. In the 7th week after Easter, so that's early May, maybe May 4th to 7th, 878 Alfred sends out the call for a levy. Meet at Egbertsstan or Egbertstone.
Egbertstone, where's that thought to be?
The exact location is debated, but likely somewhere near the borders of Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire. And incredibly, men from those shires, the ones who hadn't fled or submitted, they rallied to him.
Wow.
Yeah, that must have been such a powerful moment. These men answering the call of their king who seemed beaten, facing these overwhelming odds, it really shows his charisma, his determination. They still believed.
So the levy gathers. There must have been this fragile hope in the air, but fierce too, desperate. This wasn't just another military move, it was everything on the line. Where does Alfred lead them next? What were the risks there?
From Egbertstone, Alfred's force moves first to a place called Eilioke, and then 2 days later they arrive at Edington. That's the place we now think is Edington, near Westbury in Wiltshire.
Okay.
And this wasn't some reckless charge into the unknown. It was a calculated move. The goal was to surprise Guthrum's main force, hit them before they could fully consolidate or maybe get reinforcements.
That surprise was key.
Absolutely. And for the men marching with Alfred, the tension must have been just palpable. You're marching to fight for your homes, your families, your freedom, your whole identity against an enemy that seemed unbeatable.
You can almost feel that weight, that sense of destiny hanging right there. And then May 878, they meet Edington. What did that clash actually look like?
Well, you have the Anglo-Saxons. They're probably smaller in number, but unified and desperate, as the sources suggest. They form up in their classic disciplined shield wall, a solid defensive line.
The famous shield wall.
Exactly. And facing them, the Vikings, also renowned for their tactics, their ferocity, they form their own battle lines ready for the collision.
The descriptions are just harrowing. You mentioned the clang of steel, the shouts of men, the cries of the dying. I can almost feel the ground shake beyond the noise. What was the actual human experience? Fighting in that kind of brutal, hours-long melee. What did it take to just endure?
Oh, you would have been utterly deafening, a complete sensory overload, the noise, the smell, the sheer violence packed close together.
Yeah.
For hours, these two shield walls would have just ground against each other, a brutal test of strength, stamina, sheer willpower, and courage.
Hours.
Yeah, morale would have been constantly teetering, held up only by desperation, maybe seeing their king fighting alongside them and knowing that absolutely everything was on the line. Failure wasn't really an option.
And then somehow, the breakthrough. How did Alfred's men, possibly outnumbered, manage to crack that Viking line? What turned the tide?
The sources aren't explicit on the exact tactic, but somehow Alfred's forces broke through. It might have been a feigned retreat to draw the Vikings out, or maybe a flanking maneuver, complex tactics for the era. Whatever it was, it worked. The Viking line shattered.
Shattered.
Yes, leading to a panicked rout. The Vikings broke and ran, and the pursuit was apparently relentless. The sources talk about immense slaughter, no quarter given.
So why this victory? Why was it so different? Alfred had fought the Danes before. She'd paid them off. He'd been chased into hiding. What made Edington the decisive one, the game changer?
It seems like several crucial factors came together right then. First, don't underestimate the Anglo-Saxon fighting force, even from just one shire. We saw earlier that year at the Battle of Sinwit, the men of Devon actually defeated another Viking army led by Ubba, so they could fight.
Okay, so they had potential.
Definitely. But maybe more importantly, Guthrum, the Viking leader at Edington, seems to have lost the backing of other key Danish figures like Ivar the Boneless and Ubba by this point. They were dead or elsewhere. This weakened his overall authority and possibly the cohesion of his army.
Ah, internal Viking politics playing a role.
Very likely. And add to that a really significant event. The loss of supposedly 120 Danish ships in a storm off Swanage just the previous year, 876-877. That loss, plus maybe dwindling support from other leaders, meant Guthrum's force at Edington wasn't necessarily the peak Great Heathen Army. They were perhaps more isolated, more vulnerable than before.
Right. So a combination of Alfred's determination, Saxon resilience, and some Viking misfortune and disunity.
Exactly. A convergence of factors.
So Edington is won, Guthrum is defeated, routed. What happens next after such a crushing blow?
Well, Guthrum and what was left of his army were trapped, besieged probably at Chippenham again, and forced to surrender. The terms were quite stark. 3 weeks after the battle, Guthrum had to agree to be baptized. This happened at Aller in Somerset.
Baptized, a Viking king.
Yes, and Alfred himself stood as his sponsor, his godfather. Guthrum even took a Christian baptismal name, Athelstan.
Athelstan, wasn't that?
Alfred's deceased older brother's name.
Yes.
Yes. This was hugely symbolic. More than just religion, it was a massive political and strategic move by Alfred, trying to, as some historians put it, lock Guthrum into a Christian code of ethics. Basically, bind him by oaths he'd understand within this new framework.
Wow. That's clever. And this baptism, it leads to a whole new political map for England, doesn't it? The formal creation of the Danelaw.
It does. As part of the deal, formalized in the Treaty of Wedmore, Guthrum agreed to leave Wessex and go back to East Anglia, which is part of the army already controlled. He settled there as king, and this effectively established the Danelaw.
So explain the Danelaw again.
It was basically a territory, mostly in eastern and northern England, where Norse law and customs Danish law would hold sway. It separated that area legally and culturally from Alfred's Wessex and the English parts of Mercia. It wasn't kicking the Vikings out entirely. It was a division, like you said, a recognition they were there to stay, but now under a new negotiated order.
That's a really key insight. It wasn't total victory, wipe them out. It was strategic containment, a path to coexistence.
I think that's a good way to put it. And this new stability, this negotiated peace, it really allowed Alfred to finally stabilize his own kingdom, Wessex.
Right. He finally had breathing room.
Exactly. And he used it. This is when he starts implementing those crucial reforms, building the fortified towns, the burhs, as defensive networks, reorganizing the militia system, the fortard, to make it more effective, more readily available if needed.
So it wasn't just winning the battle. It was using the peace won to build lasting security. That shows incredible foresight. Did this peace actually last? Or was it just a temporary truce?
It laid the groundwork for a more lasting peace, yes. Sometime after Wedmore, but before Guthrum died in 890, they made another agreement, known now as the Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum.
Okay, a follow-up treaty.
Yeah, this one got more specific. It defined the boundaries between their territories more clearly, even splitting Mercia between Wessex and Danish East Anglia. It set out rules for relations, legal status, trying to minimize conflict, regulate trade between the English and the Danes.
So trying to make coexistence work practically.
Right. And what's really fascinating, perhaps even surprising, is that Guthrum, or Athelstan, as he was known after baptism, was the first Danish ruler in England to mint coins. And he minted them on the Alfredian model using his Christian name.
No way. He copied Alfred's coins.
He did.
Yeah.
It suggests an acceptance, maybe even an admiration, of the Anglo-Saxon model of kingship and administration. And apparently by the 10th century, the Anglo-Saxon model was pretty much adopted by the Anglo-Danish leaders across the Danelaw.
That's a huge shift. Not just integration, but the conquered, or at least contained, group adopting the systems of the other side. It seems Alfred's efforts really did manage to contain the wider Viking threat in England then.
They certainly did, especially in the south. Alfred's military reforms, the burhs, the better organized horde, all stemming from the Edington experience, made it much, much harder for Viking armies to just raid and roam successfully like before. By 896, the large Viking army that had been campaigning for a few years finally gave up on Wessex. Some went back to East Anglia, some to Northumbria, others sailed off to the continent.
So the tide turned.
The tide definitely turned. Edington and its aftermath decisively curtailed the really destructive phase of the Viking Age in England. It saved Wessex, and by doing so, laid the foundations for Alfred and his successors to eventually create a unified English kingdom.
So wrapping this up, What does it all mean for us looking back? The Battle of Edington, it really stands out as just one of those incredibly significant moments. In English history, sure, but in Viking history, too, a genuine turning point.
Absolutely. You have King Alfred the Great showing this incredible resilience, strategic thinking, and drawing on the courage of his people, managing to save Anglo-Saxon England from being completely overrun.
Right, when it looked like it was all over.
Exactly. And his legacy isn't just about winning that one battle. It's about the foresight to use that victory to build a lasting peace, a stronger, more defensible kingdom out of near devastation. It's about how a leader, seemingly crushed and in hiding, could turn things around against, frankly, overwhelming odds. Not just with fighting, but with shrewd diplomacy, with administrative genius, too.
Yeah, it really is a testament to leadership in the absolute worst circumstances. Proof, maybe, that even when things look completely hopeless, strategic thinking, that kind of indomitable spirit, can still carve out a different future.
Well said.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. What specific part of King Alfred's desperate stand at Edington, or perhaps the negotiated peace with Guthrum that followed, resonates most strongly with you? And why do you think that moment, that whole sequence of events, was so absolutely pivotal for the future of